Well, good morning, Suzanne. Why don't we start by your telling us a bit about your professional background and then about United Way Suncoast.
Sure. And first, let me say thanks, Doug, for having me as part of your program. I'm really happy to be here. Well, let's see. I'll you never know how short or long you want to go with your bio. So probably the easiest thing for me is to sort of talk about some milestones in my professional career. I actually have been in nonprofit leadership for pretty much my entire career, and it all started right after I graduated from college, actually. My last year in college, I went to an open house on campus for students to learn about the U.S. Peace Corps, and I went to that open house and just fell in love with the idea of going to serve in the Peace Corps after I graduated. And granted, I think, part of it was I was young, idealistic, and the thought of traveling the world and, doing great work in another country was a little bit romanticized. Nonetheless, it turned out to be probably the most important educational experience in my lifetime, really, because I served in Thailand in a very rural part of the country, and I was for many of, so this is about 30 years ago, I was a very tall white woman in an very small Asian village, and so probably the most important thing I learned through that was humility and what it's like to be a foreigner or an immigrant in another country, and it just changed my perspective on the world, and it just taught me that there's so many other places in the world and amazing cultures and people, and while they're different than Americans, it doesn't mean that they're any less than we are.
Well, Suzanne, you might recall I was a Peace Corps teacher in Ethiopia, so we share that. Oh, that's right.
Well, so I think our PCDs are special people, or we like to think.
We like to think.
But we like to think. So, what that did for me, Doug, is when I came back, I knew, without question, I came back from my service knowing that I wanted to continue to serve, that was the path for me, and I initially thought that I wanted to get into multicultural education, but long story short, I ended up in New York City and worked for a really cool organization called the International Center in New York, which helps immigrants and refugees get acclimated to life in New York City, in America. And so that was just it was a wonderful experience, and it was also where I, really got into the infrastructure of a nonprofit organization. I had a fabulous mentor in our CEO there, and really thought, well, that's where I realized, there's a place for me to do that same kind of service work here in the U.S., but I don't have to do it in another country. And certainly there's as much need in the U.S. as there are in other countries, and so that's how I got started. And I was in New York City for a couple of years, and then moved to Maine with my to-be husband because he got a job offer there. And when I got to Maine, I interviewed at 2 nonprofits and got hired by the second, and that actually turned out to be the United Way of Greater Portland in Portland, Maine. And since that time, I have either worked in United Way or led a United Way community partner organization. So I do say I've sort of been in United Way my whole career, except for my Peace Corps, my New York experience. Mm-hmm. And it's afforded me just amazing opportunity to learn and grow. And that's really what I did. I sort of grew up, again, with really strong mentorship in my CEO, learning how to be a nonprofit leader, working with boards, working with different stakeholders, and I got to move through almost every function of the organization, with the exception of CFO or COO, which is probably going to be important sort of for some of the other things I'm sure we'll talk about, because those weren't my strengths. My strengths were in other areas, and I had the opportunity to serve in roles in the organization in a variety of ways. But
now,
also,
when did you take the helm at United Way Suncoast here in Tampa Bay?
I took the helm here 4 years ago. I left my position. I was leading, by that time, after 20 years in Maine, I was leading the United Way in Portland, and very happy there, and was not looking to make a move. Nonetheless, the opportunity came to me, and I decided to take a look at it. And when I came down to the Suncoast region, really fell in love with the area, with the people, with the opportunity, and saw it as a chance to do something bigger than what I was doing in Maine. And then one of the other really important drivers for me in wanting to come here was the diversity of the region. Maine, while I loved it, and it had a lot of socioeconomic diversity, did not have very much diversity at all in regards to culture, ethnicity, race, religion. And so I wanted to come here because, for me personally, it's a really important aspect of our world, and I wanted my children to have the opportunity to live someplace that looked a little bit more representative of America and the world.
Now, I assume you don't miss ice and snow much.
No, I don't miss that. I do miss the wonderful people that I worked with over the years. I missed the community, and I did miss fall. I do miss, like, the lovely fall and summer of Maine. But
yeah, so do I. So do I. I don't miss ice and snow, and I was sure you wouldn't. Well, tell us a bit about United Way Suncoast. Just give us the facts on the area covered.
Well, we're one of 1,200 United Way organizations that serve almost every community in the U.S. We serve the 5-county region here in Suncoast, Florida, right along the western coast of Florida. Probably the population in our combined area is probably close to 3 million people. So it's an enormous geography, which can be really challenging sometimes. And in 5 counties, while there's lots of intent and desire to think about how we serve a region, I think the reality is we serve a lot of local communities within this region. And our main focus is on fighting for opportunities for families and kids who don't readily have those, especially in the areas of educational attainment and building assets so that they can be financially stable and take care of themselves. So we have hundreds of partners throughout our region that we invest in to provide programs in the areas of education, particularly early learning, and also programs that support families in building their financial capability and stability. And then we actually run some of our own programs. We have 4 neighborhood centers in some of the most vulnerable neighborhoods in our region, where we are providing a facility to bring our partners in to create a holistic set of services to meet families where they are. So we're multidimensional. The other, I think, really important value of United Way Suncoast is we play a leadership role in helping bring together the many different sectors of a community that have to work together in order to solve complex problems. So it's a complex organization sometimes, but that's also what makes it, for me personally, that dynamic element makes it really interesting every day.
Now what's your employee count at United Way Suncoast?
We have, so across our 5-county region, we have about 70, roughly in the 70 to 75 range of number of employees, hundreds of volunteers. We have 3 offices, and then because we're also in neighborhoods, really essentially like 10 locations where I have staff working throughout the 5-county region.
Just approximately what did your grants amount to, say, over the past year?
So our operating budget is around a little over $22 million, and 84% of that budget goes out into investments in the community, in programs in our partners, or could be an investment in a program that we're actually running.
So you're a pretty lean organization, administratively speaking. 80%.
We like to think so. And yet, back in the day when United Ways were first formed, really the main function was to raise money and distribute money, less of a leadership role in community, not really, providing its own programs. We were a pass-through, total pass-through organization, and those days you could raise the money and get it out, and I think it cost us, like 9 cents on every dollar. So it has changed, and we still have some donors who remember those days who might not have full knowledge or appreciation of how our work has changed. But yeah, I think we're a highly rated nonprofit.
Great. Well, now let's turn to our main subject. Thanks for filling me in on your background and your organization. You've fairly recently, at any rate, significantly restructured your executive team. And in fact, when you and I were talking several weeks ago, you mentioned this as one of your CEO goals to upgrade executive leadership at the United Way Suncoast. Tell us about the initiative and why you undertook it.
Okay. Well, there's never a single starting point, I think, for a decision. A couple pieces of information that will be helpful just as I share this is, so 3 years after I came into not 3 years, I'm sorry, a year after I was in the position here in Suncoast, I did the first reorganization, like it was a step towards where we are now, and that was the creation of a chief operating officer position in the organization. That position did not exist when I got here, and I was really, really fortunate to entice my former chief operating officer, who had worked with me for 3 years at the United Way in Portland, was able to entice her to come join my team here. And so we had really strong experience working together, figuring out her strengths, my strengths, her weaknesses, my weaknesses, and had really discovered that we were absolutely the poster child for the sum is stronger than the 2 parts, and had realized that together, we could do really great things. And so I got her to come down to Tampa, and so we've now worked together for 3 years here too. So we had some experience under our belt, and after last year, about a year ago, I made the decision again, just recognizing that I know the things that I'm really good at, and I know the things that she's really good at, that it would serve our organization if I formalized some roles and responsibilities for her, and not that I was abdicating responsibility, but finding a way to give her more formal oversight of some of the areas of the organization that I just didn't have the capability to lead because of time, but also her strength was, far exceeded mine. The other sort of really interesting piece of data into the decision-making process is that someone who had just worked with us for sort of a short time had come to appreciate our partnership together, and he recommended a book to us. He said, you two really remind me of a book that I read, and the book is called Rocket Fuel. It's written by two authors, are Wickman and Winters, so Gino Wickman and Mark Winters. And so my COO and I, we read this book and we thought, oh my God, this is us. And it's all about like these exceptional partnerships. They used Ford as an example and Disney as an example, and it's sort of, when we look at successful companies, often we just focus on the front man and not the person right behind the front man, and that's what my COO and I started to have conversation about. Is I'm a really good front man, but I need, I can never be really the best leader without the person behind me, or next to me, I should say.
Now,
and so I made the
Sure. Then with the question. Now, you mentioned COO, Chief Operating Officer. That was the title of the position originally, and has that evolved at all?
Yes, and so last year I made the decision to expand that COO, traditional COO position, into what we now call our Chief Strategy and Operations Officer.
Okay.
And so in the first iteration, my COO had the responsibilities for, the admin of the organization, HR, IT, what we call donor services, finance. And last year, I decided to expand that role and ask her to take the leadership role in coordinating all of our organizational planning efforts, including long-term strategic plans, as well as our annual organization work plan. So she was responsible for putting the processes in place to ensure that we've got stronger accountability within the organization to activate and execute against plans and budgets, which was not a strength of the organization when I got here. So the rest of the executive team, we call her the process owner of, all organizational planning. And so we set up now, the expectations with the rest of the executive team that first and foremost they're accountable to her for those processes. And it's only if and when there's a problem when I step in. So it's been different, but I think it's gotten us way further than me trying to do that.
Now, who do you supervise directly? You as CEO.
So I have the Kerry, so I should just name her, who is our Chief Strategy and Operations Officer.
Okay.
And then I have another position called a Chief Impact Officer. So that's a member of my team who, and that actually was one of the changes that we introduced at the same time when I changed Kerry's role. And my Chief Impact Officer he is providing the regional leadership for all of our work in the community to make sure that it's coordinated across the 5-county region.
Oh, okay.
So I have those two positions, and then I have what we call area presidents in two of our counties, and then I have a chief development officer and a chief marketing officer. So I have 6 direct reports altogether.
Okay. So how do you make this work? How do you keep your relationship with, I think you said Kerry is the name of your...
Yes, Kerry. Well, I can tell you that...
Operations Officer. Tell us a bit about that. Well, even before you do that, tell us where you are in terms of implementation, then we'll talk about how you keep the relationship healthy. But is this fully in place, this new structure?
It is.
Is it working?
It is... I will say the new structure, there's a part of it that is fully in place and working really, really well, and then there's a part of it that I would say is still a work in progress. Okay. So the implementation of, well, I don't know if we call it implementation, but sort of the actualization of now having a chief strategy and operations officer, we've had that structure in place for a year now, and I would say it is working really, really well. It hasn't been easy, I will say. It's been, and I can talk about why I think what it took for us to get here. That part is working really, really well. I think the area of the restructure that's still a bit of a work in progress is this new chief impact officer position, and the coordination of the work across a 5-county region. That's still a work in progress, and the most significant dynamic in that is that it's not just staff doing the work. We're so blessed to have incredible volunteer committees who advise us and direct the work in each of our local communities, and we're still finding the balance between what is a community impact strategy that should be regional versus what are the nuances in a local community that make it need to look different. And so it's not one size fits all. So that's a little bit.
It's a work in progress.
It's a work in progress, and it always will be. Yeah, I mean the work around in operations and strategy. It's not that it's more straightforward, but it doesn't have. Once we get a process in place, the expectation is it's going to be an organizational process, and there are standards that everyone has to perform to in regards to planning and budgeting and strategy articulation and program rationale and that sort of thing.
Well, now getting if I can jump in, forgive me here, but getting Kerry's position firmly established, Chief Strategy and Operations Officer, what kinds of challenges did you have to deal with to get that position fully in place and functioning?
I think I think I'll describe them as sort of two significant challenges. The first was in helping the rest of the executive team understand sort of the why. Well, maybe there's three. So, understanding the why I really wanted to shift this path of accountability for strategic planning and budgeting, more away from me to Kerry. And so what we had to do was I do a lot less one-on-ones with my direct reports, and more often than not now we have three-way meetings, so that what used to be a one-on-one for me with my direct reports now most often includes my Chief Operations and Strategy Officer in that meeting as well. Because, what we found is it doesn't make sense for them to give me an update on sort of budget or, what's working, what's not working in terms of plans, and not have her looped into that conversation. Okay. Because she's got so much more of a handle on what's happening operationally that, how many times I made the mistake of saying, oh, that's a great idea. Yeah, you should do that. And then, come to find out that, no, that there's things we should really think about because of other plans that are in place. Or so that's been, and that change, so where I had built trusting relationships with my direct reports, it became very, very important then for Kerry to try to get to that same level of trusting relationship with her, essentially her colleagues and her peers, so that she could be in the conversations and push and pull with me. So that dynamic has been, it's taken some getting used to, but I think, I would say, the majority of the executive team now really appreciate, they get a much better, she's such a smart thinker. I say to her, you've got to position yourself as sort of a thought partner with your colleagues, and I think that by and large that team has such an appreciation now for what she can bring to the conversation that I wasn't able to, and I fully admit that. So that's been, one of the challenges. So was the why. and then the trust building. And then I would say the other challenge is just, again, as I mentioned, as an organization, while people have great ideas and they have a lot of those ideas in their heads and, they know what they're working on, it hasn't been as much of a discipline within the organization to put those plans down on paper and share them and track them. And so that's something that this new structure has really, we are so far ahead of where we were certainly 4 years ago and even last year with where we are with our planning and monitoring.
Well, listen, you'll be very happy to know we've arrived at our last question, which means your day will soon get much more pleasant. You'll get rid of me, and this has been really fascinating. I appreciate you taking the time to tell us about your executive restructuring, and I suppose you could say an expanded office of the chief executive. That's the way the CEO-COO position is often described in the literature. But as you well know, it's not easy to have two strong people near the top of the organization working together. What do you do? What do you and Kerry do to make sure your working relationship stays really healthy? How do you keep it humming along?
We have part of it. I think where we are today is because we've had 6 years together, and in the course of those 6 years, we've had some really challenging conversations with each other because stylistically we are incredibly different with how we show up.
Tell us.
So one of the best examples is I am very much if we're going into a presentation, I am hugely comfortable with less structure and a lot of flexibility. Kerry would describe it as I really could care less about precision, and she's very precise. So as we go into presentations with our board now, we've just learned over time, and I'll tell you, humor is probably the best weapon that we have or strategy that we have in our relationship is, she'll say, oh, you're just going to fly by the seat of your pants, and I can push back and say, yeah, and you're going to have made sure every PowerPoint slide has been reviewed by 7 people. So it's we've come to appreciate our different styles and the value of them together. So it's a lot of honest conversation. Candor and humor helps a great deal. We can tease each other. We're both really, really aware of what we're good at and what our areas of development are, and so we have just over time learned how to sort of raise the flag and say, hey, you're being that way, and I need you to be a little different right now. So
how much time on the average would you say you and Kerry spend together?
Oh, well, we meet, we are together, we always have one-on-one time, usually for an hour at the beginning of every week and an hour at the end of every week. Mm-hmm. And then, so that's sort of our set time to, start the week and finish the week, and look beyond, obviously. And then, we also we make it a priority to be available for each other because I know she comes to me, she needs my perspective and vice versa. So she is probably my priority relationship in the organization in terms of moving the organization forward. So we have that set time, and then, we're in other larger group meetings together, probably another 2 hours a week. And the other thing is, sort of a change that I have really positioned her to lead a lot of the organizational work that I was leading before. So that's been a change for us. But it's all about communication.
That freed you up in a way to.
Well, that was one of the main reasons. Is my board said you're the relationship builder. You need to be external, and that's my strength. And so I wasn't able to do that before, and now I'm able to do that much more so.
Yeah, and that is
But
the classic rationale for a CEO-COO
yeah,
relationship, is free
yeah,
the CEO to build relationships with key stakeholders and spend more time with your board, I suppose.
that's exactly right. But I would say humor and sarcasm go a long way to get us through the tough times.
Well, good. Well, listen, Suzanne, thanks a lot for taking the time today to tell us about your exciting leadership work at United Way Suncoast. I think we'll have to do a part 2 down the road a bit where you update us on what you've been doing. But for now, I wish you a great afternoon and rest of your week, and